Welcome, everybody, to the third episode of Rocco's Rundown. I'm your host, Rocco. Today we're getting into the NL Central. I'm working my way through the division, so we started out with the NL West. That's already up, obviously. Then we went to the AL West. Now we're going to do the NL Central. We'll go to the AL Central, and then at the end, we're going to switch, and we'll go AL East, NL East. Obviously, this is a predominantly Mets podcast. So I want to finish with the Mets division and then get into a Mets episode. But that's irrelevant. Let's get into the NL Central. So, what do we got? The NL Central is a fun division. There's a lot of stars. There's a lot of superstars in the making, young talent. Also some weird old talent on top of that. A lot of veterans. Some really good coaches added this offseason. And kind of a tricky division to place. When I was going through it, I definitely had a tough time navigating my way through which rosters I really liked the best and kind of predicting based off of recent history and off seasons. But we'll get into it. So, as you can see, this is how I think it's going to shake out. Cubs 1, Reds 2, Brewers 3, Pirates 4, Cardinals 5. I hate that. I really do hate that. Because the Brewers this is the Brewers. Every year, people are like, well, on paper they got worse, or they didn't do this, or they're not going to win it this year. And then they win the division. And they have done it quite a lot recently, quite consistently. New GMs, new coaches, new guys, it doesn't matter. They just win ball games. But I'm going to probably shoot myself in the foot, and I'm just going to say that I think they'll finish third. And I'm definitely going to be wrong. But just based off of how I feel their offseason went, I don't know. I think they are actually a worse team, potentially. But before we do that, these are the over-unders. 86.5 for the Cubs, 79.5 for the Reds, 82.5 for the Brewers, 75.5 for the Pirates, 75.5 for the Cardinals. Pacoda's got 92 Cubs, 75 Reds, 80 Brewers, 75 Pirates, 78 Cardinals. Fangraphs has 83 Cubs, 78 Reds, 81 Brewers, 78 Pirates, and 79 Cardinals. Me, just based off of these win over-unders, I think I side with Pacoda. I like the over on it more. Same thing with the Reds. I disagree with both. I think the Reds are going to have a really good year. Again, I hate saying it, especially over the Brewers. But when we get into their additions, they just added a lot, including better coaching. There's a better vibe. Guys are getting more experience, like Ellie De La Cruz. This is a podcast for myself, but I want to have hot takes. I don't want it to be a bland podcast for viewers and also for myself. And I like the Reds. I don't know what it is. I'm gonna buy the Reds this year, and I might be wrong, but I'm gonna be optimistic. Brewers, I'm gonna go slightly under. I really think 82-81 is gonna be their line. Which sounds crazy that they're going to be around 500, but like I said, like my reasoning with the Reds, I'm going to sleep on the Brewers, and I'm going to be wrong, but I'd rather, I guess, take a risk with my predictions. I think it's going to be around 500 a year for them. A little bit above, hopefully, because that sounds a little ridiculous to say they're going to be a 500 team, but I don't know. It's hard to win baseball games in baseball, and I think they kind of set themselves up for a tough year. Pirates, I think the bottom of this division might be weak, so I'm going to go under. I like 75 again. I think it's a sharp under, but I think their lineup is just horrible, and we'll get into it, but I think there's just a tier gap between any solid team and their lineup. Like, their lineup is just bottom feeding in my opinion. And Cardinals, I think, are purposely trying to tank. So if a team is purposely trying to tank and has not been good recently, I'm never going to be like, yeah, I'm going to take their over. Even though 75.5 for the Cardinals is low, when we get into their offseason, I think it'll make more sense. But let's get into lineups first. So rankings, I have the Cubs lineup 1, the Brewers lineup, or the Reds lineup 2, Brewers 3, Pirates 5, and Cardinals 4, almost in a row. When we look at the Cubs lineup, maybe I'm a little high on them, and maybe this is going to be a problem. And maybe a lot of the league. I know a lot of the podcasts that I've listened to, a lot of social media, a lot of baseball heads, they're high on this line. And can you not be high on this lineup? I mean, if we look at their overall ranking last year, all these guys were top 150 hitters. Outside of their bottom 3. But if we look at their bottom 3, P. Crow Armstrong, the guy's a war machine with a not really good bat. So what does that show? He's a phenomenal fielder. He can steal the bases. And even if he hits a little bit, his value is insane. So to have him as your 7 is great. Matt Shaw obviously is going to get pulled up, I'm assuming. So we don't really know what's in there for him, but I think he's gonna bang. I think he's gonna be a great baseball player. And Miguel Amaya, young, 26. Catcher doesn't have a lot of hitting value in the league anyway. So for your worst hitter to be your 9 guy and a catcher is pretty good. But if we actually look at their lineup, Ian Happ is, in my opinion, extremely consistent. Is he going to wow you? No, but he's extremely consistent. Going to give you good plate appearances, especially at leadoff. Kyle Tucker, I saw a lot of people say he's like the budget Soto. I hate comparing their games, but Kyle Tucker's amazing. And he doesn't strike out a lot. As you can see over here, his projections. And projections, usually Fangraphs are lower or worse. So, like, technically, they think he's going to strike out. They usually think strikeout percentages are higher than what players actually get. Or they project him that way. But he doesn't strike out a lot. He walks a ton. He's just an amazing bat. And last year, yes, he dealt with injuries. But if he's most of the year healthy, especially for the playoffs and that dog days of the season in August and September, even July, Kyle Tucker is one of the best bats in the league. I mean, he's just phenomenal. Seiya Suzuki, not a great fielder, can kind of be inconsistent from time to time, likes to swing, gets spun a lot, but he's still a respectable bat. And if you look at the projections, 803 OPS, like a lot of guys would kill for that, especially as a DH. Bush, again, young, like him, a lot of promise, cut the strikeouts a little bit, but a fine hitter. Dansby Swanson, as a Mets fan, I used to see him play for the Braves. Kind of had a down year, down couple past 2 years, but his fielding is phenomenal, and he has so much value at shortstop. And even as a shortstop, he hits pretty good, a little bit above league average. He strikes out a little too much for how little he walks, but he's a phenomenal player. So to have him in the middle of your lineup, I mean, you just keep going down. Nico Horner, phenomenal. I thought he had a pretty awesome year last year. Better than I think a lot of people would have projected. And again, another just amazing fielder, kind of like not a 5-tool guy per se, but like guy has the speed, has the fielding, can hit for contact. The power numbers, maybe like a little bit more, but out of a second baseman, like it just the value is there. P. Crow Armstrong, we already talked about, and same thing with Matt Shaw and Miguel Amaya. So that lineup is just, I really love the lineup. And what I like is they got insurance for the lineup. So if Miguel Amaya can't play, like he's just such a horrible bat, can't play. Carson Kelly had a great year last year with Texas. Can play every other day and be a positive bat, especially if Amaya is struggling. Justin Turner is a vet. Yes, he's 40. Obviously, he's not amazing at his age, but he's still a veteran bat that if you need if Matt Shaw needs more time or maybe a day off, or maybe they just want some righty pop in a good matchup against a lefty, Justin Turner could go in. Birdie can play literally everywhere. Again, he fits the Cubs' identity of this just speed, defense, a solid contact, just kind of all-around guy. and even Bruhan is pretty solid. So that's their lineup, and that's why I think they're clearly the best lineup in the division. When we go to the Reds, I'm buying a lot of stock in their lineup, and like I'm expecting a lot of guys to have better years than last year and to improve. Like Friedel, I think a lot of people saw Friedel last year and liked what they saw. They're hoping it can continue to get better, and he's getting into his prime now, so you're hoping maybe these numbers are even better than what they project. But he's at worst a league average hitter with plus defense. Matt McLain they didn't have at all last year, but when Matt McLain's healthy, Matt McLain is a phenomenal player, a really, really, really just phenomenal, good, consistent ball player. That has extreme upside. That when you pair him with Ellie in this top three, I mean Ellie still strikes out a lot. You want his spin, his whiff on spin, curveballs, off speed, stuff like that to go down. But Ellie's ceiling is one of the highest in the MLB, and I think he's going to have a monster year. I mean, you saw last year he finished 17th best hitter overall. He's already a top 5, 6 shortstop, 7 maybe after last year. His strikeout and his average wasn't crazy high. But with the tools he has, the age he is, his ability, his switch hitting ability, just everything, the pop, this year is going to be big for Ellie. If there's guys you want to buy stock in, Ellie is one of those guys, and I would do it too. He's just phenomenal. Gold glove defense, extreme speed, hits the crap out of the ball, great power. If he can bring the contact up just a little bit, the sky's the limit for him. Tyler Stevenson, he's a catcher, and he's a good hitting catcher, and that has a ton of value in this league. That's why they project him to hit 4. Will he hit 4? I don't know. But he's got a ton of value at the catcher position with his hit tool. Fraley, again, another just consistent, solid guy. I just like him. He doesn't strike out a ton. I'd like him to maybe walk a little bit more. Bring up that overall hit tool a little bit. But if he can have a little bit better of a season compared to last year, that brings a lot of depth to this lineup. Same thing with Steer. Same thing with Candelario. Candelario, I wish he could walk a little bit more. This lineup definitely needs a little bit of a change of approach. They don't walk a ton. But it just feels a lot deeper than last year. Jonathan India is a phenomenal ball player, but he has not had a good couple years. And maybe they could have kept him, but you get Brady Singer out of him. I know we're going a little deeper past the lineup, but having Lux at the bottom, Candelario at the bottom, Hayes, that's a pretty decent, solid lineup at the bottom. It's just a very well balanced lineup that if they can adjust their approach a little bit, try and get on base, focus on getting on base a little bit more, they can be just a consistent hitting team, and I think that's a really good thing for a young team or a relatively young team to just be consistent. If they can have that consistency series to series with their pitching, they're gonna. I really like that lineup overall. I really like it. The Brewers. I think the Brewers have a little bit more pop and ceiling in their offense than maybe the Reds. But the bottom of the lineup and losing a couple key guys kind of scares me a little bit. And health with Yelich. Churio's phenomenal. He's going to be a star if he's not already considered a star. Yelich is great when healthy. Contreras is the best catcher in the league. But then you get to guys like Mitchell and Hoskins and Terang, where I think their floor could be a little bit lower than some of the guys towards the middle of the lineup for the Reds. But I think they have a much higher ceiling, and I think that's why this lineup is still scary week in and week out, series to series. And they're the Brewers. They have fielding value, which makes the bat worth more You know, um, you can't sleep on the Brewers. However, I think they definitely took a step back, and I think it's going to take a lot of really big breakouts, especially the bottom of the lineup, and a lot of pop to really be a competent, a contending level of offense, especially when you look at the Cubs' offense and fielding. When we look at Pittsburgh, I have them ranked 5. I alluded to earlier, I am not a fan of their lineup, and if you just look at it, just look at the names. Like the name value, you might actually get a little bit more out of, but when you compare their years, their projections, the only guys in this lineup that truly I think are consistent and scary are Reynolds and Cruz. Maybe a guy like Joey Bart can have a little bit of a bounce back, but to me that's a lot to ask. The bottom of the lineup, it's just, I don't know. It's a very righty heavy lineup. I'm not impressed with any of the guys. I don't think they're phenomenal at fielding. None of them walk. It's a lot of just quick at bats. I mean, they again, another approach change I think would be huge for them, to try and draw walks, to try and work a count. But I just their lineup is just nobody. There's not a lot of fuel behind this lineup, which sucks because they're not the best fielding team in the world, and on top of that, they have such an amazing rotation that, having even a middle of the pack lineup, this team would be amazing. But they just have a really just a bottom dwelling lineup. And the Cardinals, I think, are honestly, you could argue the Cardinals might be a tier above their lineup, and that's kind of crazy when you look at their lineup because yes, I think Wynn is great. Burleson is solid. I think he's solid, especially at DH. I would just say he's solid. Wilson Contreras had a down year last year, compared to 2 years ago. You're hoping he can bounce back. I think it'll be better, but again, catcher, or if he's at first base, there's not a ton of. If he's at catcher, the hit tool isn't extremely important, but since he's going to be slid over to first, he's going to need to hit a little bit better, especially compared to last year. Donovan, again, they have a lot of solid hitters. Donovan, Arenado, I think is great. Yankees should go get him. I know you could wait till trade deadline, but that's for a later episode. Lars, I like. Walker, I think, has a lot of really good potential. Like, the lineup is not horrible. It's a solid lineup. This is the lineup that I think the Pirates rotation would need to really contend with the top end of the division. But unfortunately, they don't have it. And then we go back to rotation rankings: 1, 4, 3, 2, 5. The Cubs rotation, saying it's 1 could definitely be argued, but I just showed as a dog. Steele was great. I think he will be great again. Tyone, a little bit more strikeouts out of him. But Tyone's a really solid 3. Boyd, they get in free agency, I think, can be an innings eater. I really like the rotation all around. They got a solid mix of righties and lefties. And I think Shota will have to carry a lot of the load, but I think he can. I think he will. And I really like their rotation, especially when you combine it with their lineup. The Reds rotation I had ranked at 4. It's 4, and it's hard because it's a really good rotation. I mean, Hunter Green, Brady Singer, Abbott, Martinez are really phenomenal pitchers. The problem is when I look at a team like the Brewers and the Pirates, I mean, they just have Hunter Green is a star, is an ace level pitcher, but those other teams have an ace and then a really, 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 really just phenomenal 2. And I don't know if Abbott or Singer can get into that phenomenal level of a 2. when you look at the Brewers, now they're not healthy. When Woodruff comes back, he is easily an ace. He's a phenomenal pitcher. It's gonna take some time for him to get back into Woodruff like mode, but when he's healthy, he's great. And Freddie Peralta had a great year last year, and him as a 2 I like much more than, let's say, Singer or Abbott. Even if somehow Martinez has a great year, like I like their depth in their rotation more. Myers is good and young. Cortez is an innings eater and fun. Savali, like Ashby, like they just have a little bit more depth than I think the Reds, and I think it's the same thing with the Pirates. Obviously, Paul Skeens is Paul Skeens. The guy is going to be phenomenal this year. Mitch Keller's good. Jared Jones is phenomenal. They add a guy like Andrew Heaney for inning-eating depth. Like I think their overall depth is a little bit better than the Reds. But the pitching in this division in general is great. You get to the Cardinals. Sonny Gray had a great year last year. I think he'll do it again. But after that, it takes a little bit of a drop off. It's just hard. I mean, the Cardinals are not openly, but basically openly tanking. So it's hard to really get guys and keep them around. And also have them pitch and want to play well. Like, if you're on a bad team, like, the motivation of trying to, really rally yourself and the guys around you into playing well is hard. It's tough. So it's a tough break for the Cardinals. And then bullpen-wise, the Brewers' bullpen, they always figure it out. Last year they were phenomenal. This year they're going to be phenomenal again. And they have a young guy. If I can remember his name. Fangraphs will have it. So let's scroll down. Relief pitcher. What was his name? Relief pitcher. Triple A. Craig Yoho. Craig Yoho is going to become their closer at some point in the season, if not right away. Craig Yoho is the Brewers. They just find guys that can pitch out of nowhere. I don't want to glaze, but I don't really care. I am gonna. Last year, 0.94 ERA, 10 saves in 60 innings with 100 strikeouts. I mean, the guy his stuff is nasty, and he's going to be their closer eventually. And yes, they lose Devin Williams, but that's the part about the Brewers that's hard to doubt them, is they find ways to find guys that just kind of appear out of nowhere. But I think they lost a solid amount last year to where they might finally have a mediocre season in their standards. The rest of the bullpens, we have the Reds at 2. A lot of these bullpens are very close, you can argue. I like their depth. Diaz, Rogers, Pagan, Suter they brought back. Barlow is solid. They have a lot of arms that I think they can go to. And when I get into the additions, the reason why I'm more confident in them is going to be because one of the additions isn't a player, it's a coach in Terry Francona, and I think he's just going to manage his team almost perfect. I don't want to say perfect because there is no perfect way to manage a team, but I think he will. Cubs, you get Presley. You have a guy like Hodge. There's some other guys like Brazier and Tealbar, and Thompson. Like, they have some solid arms, just a little bit less depth than the other teams. But again, all the bullpens in this division I think are pretty comparable. Besides the Brewers, I think they're clearly a little bit of a tier ahead. Pirates, Bednar, Santana. You can even go Holderman, Ferguson. I mean, Tim Mesa didn't really have a great year, but there's some depth there. Wentz, again, some depth. It's a solid bullpen. Even the Cardinals, I think it's the same thing. Helsley, Fernandez, Jojo Romero. Maybe a guy like a John King has a solid year. Again, there's definitely some depth, but they're all kind of in that same tier of just a solid bullpen, maybe in that 10 to 15 range at best. But at worst, it could be the 20 to 15 range. So that's kind of the breakdown on where they stack up against each other. We'll go into the additions, and this is the bigger part as to why I think teams place where they place. So when we look at the Cubs offseason, they added Justin Turner, they added John Birdie, Caleb Tealbar, Carson Kelly, Ryan Presley, Kyle Tucker, and obviously another addition is going to be Matt Shaw when he gets pulled up. And their subtractions, yes, Cody Bellinger is a very solid player, but Tucker is better than Bellinger. I don't think anybody doubts that. With health, maybe Bellinger puts up more stats, but Tucker is definitely a better player. They lose Kyle Hendricks. Again, a depth guy, solid, but a depth guy. They have plenty of pitching depth, so I don't think that's an issue. And then Paredes brought a lot of pop, but when you get Shaw, when you get Turner, I think they just added way more than they lost, and I think that's why a lot of people predict them winning the division. And it's hard to say that because you have a team like the Brewers who just find a way to win ball games. But I think this will be the year. Finally, the past couple of years the Cubs have been in contention. I think this will be the year they've put it together. They get to the playoffs, and I think they're gonna keep building on that. Now when we get to the Reds, this is why I like the Reds. They added a lot. They might have lost, but they've added a lot, and we'll get to the honestly the biggest addition this offseason, in my opinion, for them. Scott Barlow, Austin Hayes, they bring back Nick Martinez, they bring back Brent Suter, they trade for Taylor Rogers, they trade for Gavin Lux, they trade for Brady Singer, Jose Trevino, and with all those guys, starting guys, depth, good, pitching, all of that, you bring back Matt McLain. Now, hopefully he stays healthy. I think he will. Matt McLain was huge for them in 2023. I think he'll be huge for them again, especially in the top part of that lineup. Him and Ellie are going to be almost must watch baseball. Plain and simple. They are fun to watch. They're phenomenal ball players. They got all the tools. And their subtractions are Ahmed Rosario, who's a fine depth guy. Jonathan India, who, yes, as a Reds fan, you hate losing him, has potential, but he hasn't been great. And I think getting Lux and McLean will easily be more valuable than Rosario and India. And then you lose a guy like Fernando Cruz, who I think is a solid bullpen depth guy. I think he'll do good on the Yankees. But they added depth. They traded for Taylor Rogers as a funky lefty. Yeah, and then their biggest addition is Terry Francona. Terry Francona is a phenomenal coach, and I believe, I was listening to Talking Baseball, and I'm assuming they're right, which makes sense. I think Terry Francona's worst season since like 2000 is 76 wins. His worst season. Now, I know he's coming out of retirement. Some guys do really good. Some guys do. Buck Showalter came out of retirement with the Mets, had a phenomenal year, and then kind of had a down year. But I think Terry Francona, some people might argue, is better than Buck Showalter, which is a whole different argument. That's not really what I'm getting at. But Terry Francona is a phenomenal manager, and I think he'll be really key for this Reds team. When we look at their lineup, when we look at their rotation, it needs a little bit of refinement, not necessarily like adding and subtracting guys, because obviously every team could add and could subtract. Maybe not the Dodgers. But Francona, I think with the approach, is going to be huge for the Reds, because we saw they don't walk a ton. They're kind of a high upside lineup with a lower floor than maybe the Brewers. But with Francona, I think Francona will be huge for them in adjusting their approach and getting them to be a little bit more contact and being a little bit more consistent, drawing walks. And the way he manages rotations and bullpens is phenomenal. Obviously, I think adding him might be their biggest addition outside of getting Matt McLain back. And obviously, they just added in general. So the parts in are, in my opinion, significantly better than the parts out last year. So that's why I'm big on them. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just the Reds effect. But I'm in on them. The Brewers, and this is why I think they might finish third, or at least not win the division / make the playoffs, because their additions are Mark Canha, Elvin Rodriguez, Grant Wolfram, Grant Anderson, Nestor Cortez they get in a trade, and you're going to get Brandon Woodruff back, which is huge. Getting Woodruff is massive for them. But their subtractions, I think, are much deeper than usual years for them. Usually they lose one guy, like a Burns, but then they find a diamond in the rough and he doesn't replace him, but they fill in. But you lose Willie Adames and Devin Williams are the two big guys. And then you lose a depth guy in Joe Ross. And Gary Sanchez actually played a lot of solid DH days for him. Had some decent playoff moments. Was key for them down the stretch. I think it's the opposite of the Reds. The parts in clearly don't add up to the parts out. And obviously they're phenomenal at developing. They're still the Brewers. But I think this is the first year where there's a drastic gap between the parts in not matching to the parts out. And I think they will take a step back. And a lot of the projections back that. And the problem is sometimes the projections do this too, where they are under, and it winds up the Brewers proving everybody wrong. And I think it's very possible they could. But based off of my consistency with other divisions and how I think they could finish third. And I think they could definitely miss the playoffs. When we get to Pittsburgh, their additions, Andrew Heaney, depth guy, Tommy Pham, you wish would be a depth guy at the bottom of the lineup. Apparently he's going to be their leadoff guy. Adam Frazier, Tim Miza, Caleb Ferguson. They kept McCutchen, which keeping McCutchen is like I don't know. It's still McCutchen. He's a league average hitter. He's got the environment. He's got the fan love, but him being a big part of your offseason, not great. Elvis Alvarado and Spencer Horwitz they get to this offseason. But overall, they add a bunch of guys, and their only subtractions are, yes, they lose Chapman. Hurts their bullpen depth a little bit, but their bullpen is still in the same tier as a team like the Reds and the Cubs, in my opinion. And then you lose Yasmani Grandal. It's not Yasmani 3-4 years ago, so the past 2 years he's been a shell of himself. Yes, it's some depth, solid depth, but nothing too major lost. And they got some decent things back to where at least they're a little bit deeper of a team, you could argue. But the lineup, I think, is going to hold them back. And the Cardinals signed, according to Fangraphs, which I'm pretty sure they're correct. No, they didn't sign any major league contract specifically. They traded for Michael Hellman. That's their only additions. And then their subtractions are Goldschmidt, Lance Lynn, and Gibson. Obviously, Gibson and Lance Lynn were the definition of inning eaters, like just pitch-to-pitch innings and kept games not from a complete blowout for the most part. But you lose Goldie, and I think Arenado is going to take a slight step back again. And I think just the overall environment in St. Louis is not great. You have two general managers working together. One is eventually going to take over after the season, but he's only in the minor leagues. And the other guy is on his way out the door, so he's just kind of showing the new guy the way around before he retires. Like, not actually, but that's like the office environment version of it. So just not a lot of positive outlook. And I think that a lot of the times can determine a season, because if they hit a wall early or they come out slow, I think it'll kind of stay that way. I don't think the fan involvement will be crazy. I don't think the player environment will be fun and awesome. So I think they might be a slightly overall better roster maybe than the Pirates, but I think the environment and the direction they're going is not, and so much worse that I think that the Pirates will wind up finishing above them. But there's definitely a tier of, like, the Cubs, I think, are on their own tier. I hate saying that, but I think they are their own tier in this division. And then the Reds and the Brewers, and then it's another tier, and I think it's the Pirates and the Cardinals together. And then lastly, we'll get into X factors. I kind of do this on the fly, but I have an idea. I think the Cubs, their main issue in their lineup is either Pico Armstrong developing a bat, or one of either Horner, Shaw, or Swanson taking that leap back to what they either were or becoming a little bit better of an offensive player, just so that that middle lineup gets a little more scary. But I love their lineup overall. It's deep. It's consistent. Maybe walk a little bit more, but overall, the lineup is going to be very good this year. But yeah, so X factors are you could pick any of these four, really: Swanson, Horner, PCA, or Matt Shaw. For their rotation, it's Imanaga. I know he proved it last year, but if Imanaga has a significantly worse year compared to last year, then this rotation starts to look a little weak or feeble. Not horrible, but it definitely... Imanaga needs to continue to be at that ace level for this rotation to be good enough to support that lineup and the bullpen. And then in the bullpen, he had a really down year last year. I know I'm kind of picking the big hitters here, but I guess it's got to be Ryan Presley. They trade for him. You give up a prospect in Cam Smith. That guy's hitting the crap out of the baseball for the Astros right now. The Astros found a way again. But you really need a really good year out of a guy like Presley to really be your ninth inning guy, shut down the game, rack up the saves, and get back to Presley we knew 2 years ago. And I think that's why they traded for him. So that's why I think he's the X factor for their bullpen. When we get to the Reds, in my opinion, their X factor in their lineup, you could go to two guys. In my opinion, the biggest X factor is Matt McLain, if he can be healthy, and the Matt McLain we think he is, that he's shown us. That top of the lineup is very scary when it's Friedel, McLain, Ellie. Like that's gonna be a fast, hard hitting, tough lineup to start with, and then a bunch of depth below it. I think if McLain really has a really, really good year, what we think he can be, I think the sky's the limit then for this top half of the offense. You can also point to a guy like Candelario. Just pop-wise, I think it would be nice to have a little bit of depth here, some home run hitters, which they have. But especially Candelario. If Candelario can get some really big home runs for them, I think that'll also help. But it's definitely Matt McLain is their biggest X factor for the lineup. Pitching, it's either Singer or Abbott. I mean, we love what we saw out of Abbott for the most part last year. I think he's a very solid 3. Just one of them kind of has to take that leap into the 2-ish realm, even if it's a really high-end 3. If they have 2 high-end 3s, the rotation gets a lot deeper, especially with a guy like Martinez who had a solid year last year. Lodolo, I think, is a pretty good 5. And with Franconia, I think they'll be fine. I think he'll manage the bullpen and the rotation very well. But I really want to see Singer or Abbott jump, especially because they traded for Singer. I think him more. If you trade for a guy and then he winds up being better than what you even thought his value was in the trade, that's huge. So I think Singer / Abbott, but mostly Singer, I think is the X factor for the rotation. And the bullpen, I'll go Brent Suter. He was solid for them last year. They brought him back. I think the top end is going to perform. Diaz is good. Taylor Rogers is good. Pagan, Barlow. They have the guys. I think if Suter can be another really good lefty, a traditional lefty, I think they need that. Because Taylor Rogers, his funky arm slot, all that. If Suter can be your traditional power lefty out of the bullpen, I think that'll be big. They'll have another guy to go to, and I think that will be he'll be like a Swiss Army knife for Francona. So I think Suter's definitely the guy. If he can do similar to what he did last year, maybe a little bit better, he could be a big X factor for the depth of that bullpen. We get to the Brewers. That brings me all the way down there. The Brewers, you could point to guys like Yelich or Hoskins because of health and age. I'm going to go with Garrett Mitchell, though. The guy can field. The guy can run. Struck out a lot last year, and I think if he can cut the strikeouts, walk a little bit more, be that consistent double machine that I think he can be, the value that you're going to get out of him is going to be insane. So I really want to see Mitchell kind of take a leap, because I think that'll make that lineup scary again. More of a threat. The bottom, I think they're all in kind of the same boat, where it's like, all right, just keep taking leaps, try and get better. But yeah, I think if Mitchell can take a leap, then that top four really becomes scary, where even if they have some struggles with depth in other places, they will have a much better, more contending lineup, a playoff level lineup. Their rotation, I'll go with Freddie, because I think you get Woodruff back. I think Woodruff will be Woodruff no matter what. But if Freddie can have another surprising year like last year and get to the innings and have the solid ERA, the great K per 9, then all of a sudden it's like, all right, they really got a two-headed monster again. They lose Burns. They lose a bunch of pitching depth. But Mizorowski's eventually going to come up. Maybe not this year, but next year. But now you get Freddie and Woodruff, to where if Freddie can jump into that almost an ace level, if Woodruff walks after the offseason, you get Mizorowski. These guys can perform like Myers and Savali and Ashby. Their rotation will be solid next year too. So I think you want to build on that. So I think that's why Freddie is really the X factor again. And then for the bullpen, I mean, you could honestly pick anybody. For me, I'm gonna go with a young lefty, Brian Hudson. I think lefties are just so important in the bullpen because it's no longer specialists anymore. You have to pitch 3 outs. And I think a young guy like Hudson, relatively young, 27, who's projected to have a good year, had a solid year last year, could just add some more depth. They have plenty of lefties, but you want a lefty that you can consistently go to and feel good about. And I think he can. I think he has shown he can be that guy, and I think if he can be that guy, that'll be a big, big addition for their bullpen. X factors for the Pirates lineup. I guess you have to say O'Neal Cruz. If he can jump to superstar level, then this lineup is solid enough with the rotation. But that's kind of the obvious answer. Other guys I'd like, Joey Bart. If he can be as good as the prospect he was projected to be, then you get a little bit of depth to where it's like, okay, maybe they're actually a solid enough lineup with this elite rotation. So the answer is probably Joey Bart. So no, I'll stick with it. Joey Bart's probably their X factor. If he can even be a slightly above league average bat, it'll bring enough depth to their lineup where maybe they can contend. But I think also O'Neal Cruz still has to take another leap as well. So I'll go with Cruz and Bart. Rotation-wise, probably Jared Jones. We know he's got the stuff. We know he's nasty. But I'd really like him to take that jump into it's Skeens and me. Like, we're the two-headed monster. I like Keller. I like Heaney. I like their depth. Skeens is phenomenal. He'll be Skeens. But I'd like Jared Jones to also be one of those guys to jump into the conversation of, well, I know you think it's just Skeens and I'm solid, but I'm that guy too. Um, yeah, Jared Jones to me is the most important guy to take a leap in their rotation, in my opinion. And then we get to the bullpen. I'll go with Ferguson. He had a really solid year last year. No, actually no. Let's go with let's go with Joey Wentz. Ferguson had a solid year. They need another lefty. You like Bednar. You hope he has a little bit more consistent of a year. But you overall you like their bullpen. But if Wentz can kind of get into that high 3s ERA where they can go to him a little bit more consistently, I think that's another lefty added, which they really need, which is why they went and got Miza. But I think Miza could be inconsistent. If Joey Wentz can just be consistent and take a little bit of a jump, I think then this bullpen becomes really good, really deep, and then it's just go get rotation guys come the trade deadline. And then there's the Cardinals. The thing is, if you're actively tanking, you don't need guys to be quote unquote X factors, but I think for them their X factor is their young guys developing. Look at all their young guys win. Donovan, Walker, Gorman, Herrera. I think is going to have a really good year. Take a leap. If those guys can take that leap, Lars Nootbaar, if they can take that leap, then that allows their rebuild to kind of fast track itself a little bit. They have a guy that they can consistently go to. They have guys that they can consistently rely on and go to. And then it just makes it easier to rebuild. And they have some vets. But yeah, you could pick any of the young guys. I guess Wynn, Gorman, and Herrera are probably the 3 biggest ones, in my opinion. So, if they can really jump, cut the strikeouts a lot, obviously, I think not this year, but next year, the year after, they can really have something to build with their farm system and signing guys and rebuilding their identity. The rotation, I'll go with actually I'll go with Mats. The reason why I go with Mats is their rotation's actually pretty solid. It's not, blow you away, but they're a solid 4. And then you get the Mats, and it kind of takes a decline down, a significant decline. So if Mats can kind of show him something and be a depth guy, a better depth guy, a better innings eater, I think that'll be a lot more valuable and bring a little bit of a scare that this is a really good rotation, that if their young guys bang one night, you'll lose the game 9-2. So I'll go with Steven Matz. And then their bullpen, let's go Ryan Fernandez. The reason why I go Fernandez, young, gonna get a lot of experience, gonna get the innings. If he can take a little bit of a jump, then they have a 7th, 8th inning guy with Jojo Romero, with a guy like John King and Matthew Liberatore, where if they trade Helsley, because if their goal is to tank or to rebuild, you're going to want to trade Helsley, you're going to want to trade Arenado. So you want guys that can fill in for them or can be valuable pieces, so that then when they trade Helsley, they get the prospects in return or they get the cash or whatever. They have stuff to build off of. And that's, again, why I said the X factors are the young guys, because if the young guys produce, they bang, they do everything they need to do, all of a sudden they have a lot more to build off of, and it makes the rebuild easier. So, yeah, those are my X factors. Overall, these are my predictions. Like I said, Cubs over, Reds over, Brewers under, Pirates under, Cardinals under. I think this is going to be a star-studded division. The Cubs got a bunch of them. PCA, Nico Horner, Shota, McLean, and Ellie for the Reds. Woodruff, Craig Yoho. Go buy his jersey now before it's too late. No, but Craig Yoho. Churio. You go to the Pirates and Skeens and Jared Jones. The Cardinals got a bunch of young guys who may not be household names yet, but if they can really take that leap, they're going to have some really solid building blocks to build off of. But yeah, so this is my NL Central review. And yeah, till next time.